Hello and welcome to a brand new video and podcast from FantasyFootballScout.co.uk. Today, my name is Brigadier Munday and I am joined by my esteemed superior officer, the FPL General, and he's here to tell you his orders. So how are you doing, sir? It's nice to be joined by my superior officer today, and I'm going to give you a salute before we begin.
Yeah, good to be here, David. Looking forward to this new weekly show that we're doing. Looking forward to guiding the troops into another battle, another campaign. So, yeah, good to be here and excited to see where this show goes.
Well, in terms of where it's already gone, those of us that are not watching this and are listening on a podcast, you probably might want to check out the video version of this because we've gone the whole hog today. I've gone and got myself a Brigadier's uniform. I was looking for a beret so I could replicate Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart from Doctor Who. That may have to come at a later point. Or alternatively, by episode 2, everybody hates these outfits so much that they're just gone completely. And of course, the General, sir, you are donned with your famous cap.
Yeah, my famous expensive cap that I finally purchased during this preseason. I should have had this a long time ago. It's funny. I was just sitting here before we start recording, and I just asked myself, what has my life become? my wife popped her head in the door. She's very hungover today. She just popped her head in the door before I started, and she just said, "What on earth is going on?" And she just left again. So I have a lot of explaining to do later. I think she thought I set up an OnlyFans or something. So.
I have to say, yeah, I mean, you sent me the screenshot of what your preview looked like on Zoom with that very caption. I mean, we could try. I mean, there's always, always good ways to support the channel, get a few extra bits of, tech involved, So if that's what people are interested in, let us know in the comments. But please don't do that. But yes, you of course mentioned that we've got some troops to direct, and very much the theme of this show is that we've got the General for about 40-45 minutes. I'm his Brigadier, which means I answer directly to him, and it's my job to be the go-between between the General and the troops. And the troops, if we haven't clarified already, is you guys. You are part of the General's army, and he's got orders for you. It's very true. He is your mother now. So you have to listen up. He's got orders that are going to help direct your campaign. 3 every week, tailored to the specific dilemmas of the week. And we've got 2 episodes of this before we start the season. And so this first episode is going to be a little bit more broad, a little bit more spread around generic ideas for how you can build your team. But then as we move into each game week, those orders might get a bit more specific to do with who's in form, who's not in form, fixtures, etc. So yeah, it's going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, I like this idea. Like I say, before the season starts, it's very much going to be geared towards kind of building a game week 1 team or what you need to do between now and the season starts. And like you said, much more specific about teams and players to target and stuff when we are mid-season. So yeah, really looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's going to be good fun. Now, I did promise that the General has orders for you, but I actually have some orders for you as well. That is, of course, for you guys to make sure that you have signed up to Fantasy Football Scout membership before the start of the campaign, because now is the best time to do it. You can save up to 30% on those preseason prices, and you'll get all the juicy good stuff that we're always making a big deal of on these shows. So if you want any information on that, head to the website and get yourself signed up now. But you don't want to hear about my orders. You're here not for the Brigadier, but for the General himself. And let's move to your first order of the day, sir. Take us away with order number 1.
Yes, order number 1 for pre-season and between now and when the season starts is go back to your first draft and see what has changed. And the main thing is to ask yourself, why have those picks changed? So a lot of people take screenshots of their first draft. Even if you don't have that, you probably have an idea of the first players you put in as soon as FPL went live, which feels like a lifetime ago now. And I guarantee you there's at least 4 or 5 of those players who are not in your latest draft. So very easy to get caught up in preseason content, in videos like this, in podcasts, reading articles. Your thinking can be, your judgment can be clouded by other content creators or other FPL managers, friends, and all that kind of stuff. Or some friends might be trying to push you down a route that you're not intended to go because they want to beat in a mini league and stuff like that. So you've got to always be careful with who you take your orders from. So very important, but at some point between now and the start of the season, go back to that first draft or at least try and put it together from memory. And then just ask yourself why are some players not in it that were initially? And was that first gut instinct? Maybe that is the way to go. And maybe just weigh it up. And is there a good reason for those changes? So it's a very healthy exercise to carry out at some point before the campaign starts.
Well, before I ask you some questions, I'm going to salute and say, sir, yes, sir. I completely appreciate that advice. Thank you very much. And what we do have on the screen right now is your first draft. And so I was wondering, sir, if you could tell us some individuals who are not in your current first draft who used to be and perhaps why they've changed.
Yeah, I think first draft included a few guys that are not there now. Nkunku up front, Heung-min Son in midfield, and also Jordan Pickford. And the big one's probably Trent at the back. So these are picks I'm going to go back to over the next few weeks and really, ask myself, they were in my first draft. There must be good reason for that. So why have they come out, and are the replacements better, or should I go back to those first picks? So Trent is obviously a big talking point going into the new season. He's expensive when it comes to defenders. There's a lot you can do with the cash saving in other positions, in particular with the midfielders. Trent was in my first few drafts. He hasn't been in my last 2 or 3. And again, it's probably going to go down to the wire in that decision. It might even be a case of I have a Trent draft and a non-Trent draft on the Friday of game week 1. So Trent, it's the game week 2 fixture against Bournemouth, which is very, very appealing. But we know what he can do just over a long stretch of games as well. So it's a tricky one, but was in the first draft, not in the latest one. So it's something I need to go back to. Also up front, you've got Nkunku. Again, I think he went into the first draft just out of kind of price, shiny new toy. But as the weeks have passed by, I've kind of gone back to my usual kind of set of rules of ignoring new players to the league and also avoiding teams that are in transition. And Chelsea are very much a team in transition with a new manager and lots of new players. So Nkunku in the first draft probably won't be in the final draft. More likely to be a kind of steady Eddie, safe, proven pick like a Jesus or an Ollie Watkins. In midfield then, I think Heung-min Son went into the first draft. Again, a lot of good comments coming from him about being injured last season, getting over his hernia issue, new manager. As we'll talk about later, I've got a little boy called Sonny, so there's some personal reasons to go for the Tottenham man and the new manager as well. I'm a Celtic fan, so I'm hopeful that Postecoglou is going to do well at Tottenham. But again, as the weeks have gone by, as you try and squeeze 0.5 from here and there, Heung-min Son has dropped out for a different midfielder. And then the final position, I think, in the starting 11 that's different is Pickford, the goalkeeper. He was in the first draft, just nice and easy, good fixtures. You kind of know what you're going to get from him as a 4.5 goalkeeper. But since then, Onana has joined the Premier League and Manchester United, and he's in my latest draft. So one of my big decisions, game week 1, do I spend an extra 0.5 for Onana, or do I go back to my initial game week 1 pick in Pickford? So I think one more change on the bench as well. Like a lot of people, Botman was in my first draft, just automatically underpriced. Why is he 4.5? Top 4 team last season. But when you dig into the fixtures a little bit more, they're not fantastic to begin with for Newcastle. So I think Botman's a player I might swerve to begin with and come back to him in a few weeks, and hopefully he might even be 4.4 at that point when people start to sell.
There's lots of changes that you've made there, and I think the recurring thing I'm sort of discovering for each one is it very much feels like a lot of them are influenced by your identity as a FPL manager, which is something you've always spoken about over the years, more of a steady Eddie manager. And I didn't want to front load people with this right at the beginning because we were shoehorning silly outfits in their face, but I'm just going to quickly talk about your OR history because it is, of course, very good. 3 times in the top 500, 5 times in the top 20k, 8 times in the top 50k, and I think it's 9 of the last 10 have been in the top 50k. So sorry, it's 9 50k, 9 of the last 10. There's just so many good stats. I mean, we have all these stats about players. There's good ones about yourself as well. Do you think that steady Eddie approach is one of the biggest reasons why you've been able to achieve that? And then does that then influence how you set up for game week 1 to think, I've done this before, let's do it again?
Yeah, I kind of always revert to my tried and tested approach when it gets to game week 1. You might see my first draft has a few spicy picks, but as it gets closer and closer to the season, it's much more like the template players, the highly owned players. I don't go out of my way to pick the highly owned players, but it kind of happens naturally because, good players, good teams, good fixtures. Most managers gravitate towards the Estupinans of this world for game week 1 and players like Saka and Haaland anyway. So, yeah, when I think back in particular to my kind of consistency over the years, it has been the safe approach. It's not taking risks on players whose expected minutes are an issue. And we might see in my current draft soon that there is 1 or 2, Man City picks in there. and I'm not 100% sure about going there because it doesn't really suit my style of play to sweat over clean sheets. Team sheets. I sweat over clean sheets as well, but I don't like sweating over team sheets, in particular Manchester City midfielders, every weekend. So that is a few things that I need to weigh up between now and the start of the season. But as people who follow me for a while, or if you're following me for the first time this season, you'll get to know very quickly that you can almost predict what my transfers are going to be and what my captaincy is going to be each week because I play a very, very safe, boring. It is a boring way to play the game, but it's also effective. I like green arrows. I like good overall ranks at the end of the season. So I'd be sticking to my usual strategy this season.
Well, I mean, that's very on brand, of course, because tactical discipline and self-control is one of the many things that a general needs when he goes into battle. So it's nice to see that you're keeping up with that. And this is a man who's won many campaigns. So stick with him and stick in his platoon, and you may go particularly far. Permission to show my team, sir. My first draft.
Permission granted.
There we go. Well, I can't offer quite as many good finishes as yourself, but my first draft very, very similar in certain areas. I had Pickford as well, and the reason I moved away from him was because I found goalkeepers with better fixtures. I liked Flecken. I'm interested in the United defence. I may go for Onana, for example. I also had Pascal Gross as well. So we had some similar dilemmas, so I won't duplicate. But Pascal Gross was someone that I had because he was one of the better Brighton players last year, was the highest scoring one. And I still don't actually know where I'm going to go with that one. So I've put Matoma in because everybody else has got him at the moment, to be honest. But I'm still waiting to see how things go out in pre-season because I want to see where Gross is going to play. He traditionally has the highest expected minutes, but isn't necessarily always the guy that is in the most dangerous areas because he can moonlight as a right wing back, for example. So they're the two additional changes for me that I think that were very similar. So, were very different, so that we're avoiding some duplication there. So, yeah, going back to those first drafts is quite useful. I guess my final question for you, because I've also taken out Trent, is do you think removing Trent is something that is on brand for you or something that is off brand because he's very expensive and he's maybe difficult to get to? Or do you see spreading the cash as something that is something you'd rather do? Because, I mean, that is presumably a decision you've still got to make between now and Gameweek 1.
Yeah, I find I'm quite conflicted on this one. I feel like part of it is on brand and then part of it isn't because I've always liked spreading the cash around the squad. And I'm going to probably do that with Salah. I'm probably going to go without Salah and spread the cash around the squad. But on the flip side, Trent has been a very good servant, a very good soldier over the years. And I tend to stay loyal to picks that have done well for me in previous seasons. And I do like the idea of having the most expensive defender and you can go anywhere afterwards. So I'm on the fence on this one, not sure what to do. And at the moment, it feels a bit like a 50-50 decision. But like I said, he's not in the current draft. So maybe that tells you where I'm leaning.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It's going to be a difficult decision for everybody, I think, going into game week 1. Well, thank you, sir, for your first order. We're going to take a brief interlude to discuss one of our many recurring sections that we're going to have this season on General's Orders. And it's a slightly shorter version this time around. And it is, of course, entitled Dad's Army. And you can see the characters from the famous BBC sitcom on the screen right now. And we have decided to create a bit of a segment where we're going to take a look at your dads, and specifically mine as well, because every week when I'm preparing for my FPL team, my dad is quite often in touch, not necessarily asking for help, but just telling me what he's doing. And it's usually quite strange, it's usually quite silly, because he is about as casual as it gets. And I know that I've mentioned him a couple of times when we're trying to compare what engaged managers doing versus casual managers. I always mention my dad and the silly things that he does, and I've actually had a load of people being like, can we just get an FPL league where everybody's dads join and we can just see who has the craziest dad? Well, the best way to do that, of course, is to track my dad's team this year. Now, I was hoping to be able to bring you some information about his team this year. I asked him 2 days ago, have you started your FPL team yet? And he just left me blue ticked. Didn't even reply on that specifically. We've talked about other stuff. Don't worry. Me and my dad are on good terms. Don't worry. But that's where my dad's at. My dad hasn't even set a team. So you could argue perhaps maybe he's like Godfrey, just to sleep in the corner. But it gave me a little bit of inspiration for everybody else. If you could write in and tell us what your dads are up to in FPL every week, we'll give an update from my dad's team when he actually remembers to get one, which will probably be on Saturday morning after the Game Week 1 deadline. And we'll see what everybody else is up to. I was going to ask you, Mark, if you'd ever watched Dad's Army and any relatives in your family that have particularly wacky FPL teams, which is annoying when you make content, isn't it? Because it's like having a toddler. You just watch them walk into stuff that they just, it's very annoying.
Yeah, it's just very vague memories of Dad's Army on TV in Ireland as a youngster. Probably wasn't on TV as much there as it was in the UK. So not overly familiar with the show. But in terms of I really like your idea of Dad's Army. I'm looking forward to hearing your. I'm not going to say sage advice from your dad this season. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of nuggets of information we get from him and what we can take from him. Maybe we can improve him as an FPL manager this season. Hopefully, in terms of the relatives and stuff, it's for the last couple of years we've had a family league, with my siblings, a couple of nephews, a couple of nieces, and it's been, it's set up as a head-to-head league. A couple of nieces, like a 10-year-old niece and a 13-year-old niece, and both of them really enjoy when the weekly matchup comes up against Uncle Mark, the full-time FPL content creator, and very often they have got the better of me, and all they need in a season is one victory over me, and I do not hear the end of it in the family WhatsApp group. Mark, I'm 10, you're a full-time FPL, I beat you, ha ha ha. With a midfield of Granit Xhaka and Iwobi and all these guys. One of those freak weeks where you have the template picks do badly, the high owned players do badly, and the differentials do well, and the little nieces get the bragging rights. So yeah, the family leagues are great for that kind of stuff.
I'm glad that you've done it head to head, because that is probably going to make it. It allows them the opportunity to actually enjoy the odd victory over you, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to go on a limb here and say we've won the overall thing every year for the past 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, it's got to be head to head. Makes it more interesting. Gives much, the WhatsApp chat is much better when there's a weekly head to head against someone, and the pressure is always on. I always feel the pressure that I need to get over the line almost every week in those matchups, especially against the younger ones.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And those picks you mentioned there, they are just the absolute hallmark of those managers sometimes that we are faced with in our family league. I find it's like the 5 million midfielders. I think that's the most common position, where they pick up a 5 million midfielder at a big club. I don't know if you remember when N'Golo Kante was just in everybody's teams, because I don't know, like Alan Shearer would just every week say on Match of the Day that he was superb. And then all of a sudden, everybody who just watches Match of the Day goes for him. And then, well, it sounds like they owned that player when they face you in the head-to-head. It's like, oh, because we get it in the cups, don't we, sometimes? We get knocked out by someone who triple captained Bakayoko.
Yeah, and they get the 1 week of the season where Bakayoko gets a goal and assist and 3 bonus, and that's you out of the cup. What a waste of time. I don't think I've ever got past round 3 or 4 in that FPL Cup. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's not fun, but at the very least, it's a good laugh. And so that's what this section is going to be about for the rest of the season. We'll have some more nuggets of information from my dad, and we'll work out which of the 7 characters he's behaving like this week from Dad's Army. And then for your dads as well, chuck them in, or your mums as well. There's famously an episode of Dad's Army called Mum's Army, so we can shoehorn everybody in. You got a granddad, any kind of relative. We want to hear what they're up to, if it's particularly funny or particularly sage. And at the same time, make sure you get their permission before you send them here, because we may or may not be laughing at them and sort of ridiculing them. So we wouldn't want to do that without permission. So don't forget that. Well, speaking of permission to move on to order 2, sir.
Yes, permission granted.
So here we go. Order number 2. Take it away, sir.
Order number 2, it's something I've heard on a couple of other podcasts, if I'm being honest, over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's really, really important. I think as FPL managers, we put too much weight on game week 1 fixtures when we're building our game week 1 team. So my order number 2 for this episode is, at some point before the season starts, look at a fixture ticker. Fantasy Football Scout have a great fixture ticker where you can remove game weeks. So I would look at a fixture ticker, remove game week 1, and sort by difficulty, and then see how that changes your thinking. So, for example, if we take away game week 1, Chelsea have Liverpool game week 1, but when you take that out, they're straight to the top of the ticker, game week 2 to game week 7, things like that. A lot of people are putting a huge amount of weight on Brighton at home to Luton in game week 1. It's only 1 game. And if you take that one out, Brighton drops significantly down the fixture ticker from game week 2 to game week 8. So always, I think it's very, very important that we don't zone in on game week 1 too much. Let's face it, we're not playing our free hit in game week 1. We're building a team for, 4 to 8 game weeks, maybe even longer. So if you can, look at a fixture ticker, remove the first fixture for each team, or even just look at a player. Like, look at Ollie Watkins. He's not in too many teams because he's got Newcastle first. Look at his fixtures, ignore the Newcastle one, and see how you feel about Ollie Watkins then. Because let's face it, we've only got 1 free transfer a week. We're not going to be making wholesale changes to our teams if we don't wildcard early. So you've got to take a longer term view of your game week 1 picks rather than putting too much weight on the first fixture. Don't worry if some of your picks have away fixtures in game week 1. They have difficult fixtures. Chilwell's a good example. Don't worry if he has Liverpool in game week 1. If you think Chilwell's a good pick for the first 8 game weeks, you pick him and you probably play him against Liverpool and try and get an attack in return. So I think that's a good tip and something I've picked up myself recently, and something I'm going to try and do as well is, I've had Jesus in my team almost every draft, but I've never felt 100% confident in the player or in the pick. And if I just ignore game week 1 for Ollie Watkins, I really like his fixtures game week 2, game week 3 onward. So I may make that switch at some point between now and the start of the season. So yeah, it's a good exercise. Ignore game week 1 and see if that changes your thinking on certain picks and certain teams.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the one that does stick out for me, because I've the season ticker up on the screen, is that Arsenal do drop quite significantly, which makes a lot of sense because that Forest game at home is an easy one on paper. Nottingham Forest were the worst team away from home last season, and I got a bit of stick recently when I experimented with a Salah draft, which involved I actually went the other way. I kept Jesus and did away with an Arsenal midfield, so it was Salah in for Saka, and I mean, we've done some more detail on that in other videos, so I won't bore people with the specifics of why I've tried that. Do go have a look at my team reveal for a bit more information. But just seeing how Arsenal drop off there makes me feel a bit more comfortable, not quite so heavily invested in their attack, because you notice that United, Brentford, Villa, Man City, Spurs, Everton, Chelsea all have better fixtures over the longer term outside of that first one. So yeah, I mean, would you feel comfortable with just one Arsenal attacker based on this? I mean, just wondering how much of an impact taking that Forest game out has on your thinking. I suppose if in a world where they go nuclear against Forest, and do you think that you would then need to jump back on, or do you think that you just if you go for one Arsenal attacker, just accept you're going to get outscored in game week 1, but then you might turn things around game weeks 2 to 8, which of course maybe is more beneficial for your Green Arrows? What do you think?
Yeah, good question. This is why it's a good exercise, because it challenges your thinking on your picks when you look at the fixture ticker in a slightly different way. I still think looking at this, even if you take away game week 1, when Arsenal still have Crystal Palace and Fulham and Everton, game week 2 to game week 5, I still fancy double Arsenal attack. I want triple Arsenal no matter what, because the fixtures are good, not just in game week 1. And again, if I mentioned there that Jesus might drop out for Watkins, but if that did happen, I think Martinelli would then probably appear in my midfield alongside Saka. So if I took Jesus out, it's probably not going to mean double defense or just one midfielder. It probably opens the door for a Martinelli, who I probably deep down really want anyway, more so than Gabriel Jesus. So I'm quite open to making that switch. Watkins comes in for Jesus, and then Martinelli goes in maybe for a Foden, who I think's in my recent draft, who's is slightly risky with Pep as his manager and rotation and all that. So Arsenal, again, another good example here, who dropped down the ticker. And another one that stands out to me here is Liverpool, because if you look at a fixture ticker and Liverpool have Bournemouth at home, let's say that was game week 1. And again, this has been mentioned in other places, but just to reinforce it, Salah's ownership, I think, is about 24% right now. If it was Bournemouth game week 1, that would be 40% easily, maybe more, maybe 45%. So again, don't put too much weight on game week 1. If you think Salah is a fantastic pick for game week 2, if you think you'd really like to captain him in game week 2, then looking at the fixture ticker in this way might sway it back towards the likes of Salah and even Trent as well for that reason. So I know Liverpool are not at the top of the ticker here, but again, Bournemouth is very, very attractive. But again, I'm just thinking now, saying that, maybe I'm conflicting myself here, because if we're saying don't put too much weight on game week 1, maybe you don't put too much weight on any single game week. And maybe that's what people are doing with the Bournemouth game. It's only one game, anything can happen. Yes, it was 9-0 last season, but unlikely that's going to happen again this year. And if your reasons for picking Salah or Trent are heavily weighted on game week 2 only, then that's probably why they're not in my recent draft, and it's why I prefer spreading the cash. So it's different managers will look at this in different ways, and you've got to decide where you put your weight on certain fixtures and how many fixtures.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly helped me realise that even just then, that the reason why I tried Salah in the end was actually more about form than it was about fixtures, because the way that he finished last season was actually insane. You know, in the last 12 game weeks, he was top of the league for expected goal involvement, shots on target, and looked like he was back to his best. And since they changed their system to that different version of midfield with Trent involved there as well, I think it's a 2-3-3-2 or something. It's a very complicated new formation. Since they made that switch, I think that was game week 30. I think Salah was the top point scorer as well, so it does benefit him, and he's doing very well in pre-season. And so it's made me realise I've got Salah there for the form rather than the fixtures, and of course that maybe comes into play with the captaincy and things like that.
Yeah, one more point on this fixture ticker before we move away. Brighton, if you take away game week 1 against Luton, they dropped down to, I think, 14th on the fixture ticker. I've seen a lot of teams with triple Brighton. And do you really want to have triple Brighton by the time you get to game week 4 when they run into Newcastle, Manchester United, and Aston Villa not too long after that? So my advice is probably double Brighton is enough if you want to attack the fixtures early on, because it can be quite difficult to move off triple Brighton, because you probably will have a couple of other issues to deal with in the meantime. So I think coupled with the rotation issues at Brighton, with Europe kicking in after the international break, my advice would be double Brighton is enough rather than a triple up.
Yeah, game week 3-4 was around the time I was looking at the very least, probably getting rid of my midfielder. There's lots of options in whichever Brighton midfielder you go with. You're in a bracket where you can jump off quite easily, and this graphic just drives that home in a nice visual way. But speaking of Brighton, or rather someone who used to play for Brighton, before we move on to our next section, I did just want to ask you about Trossard, because you mentioned Martinelli, but Trossard seems to be making a real name for himself in pre-season. I wondered if you've given him any consideration. 3 goals, so he's the top goal scorer in pre-season so far. He's only behind Saka for total goal involvements. And then when you look at the number of minutes he's played, he is outside of, I'll just double check it with the old spreadsheet now. He is in actual fact the most utilised wide forward in pre-season for Arsenal. He's had more minutes than Saka, Martinelli, etc., etc. Can you read anything into that? He's probably too risky for someone as seasoned and disciplined as the General, but he's kind of knocking on the door.
Yeah, knocking on the door, and I don't like that he's knocking on the door, because I'm a big Martinelli fan, and I'm not giving any consideration to Trossard, because I still expect Martinelli to be in that starting 11 game week 1, and then we reassess it on a weekly basis after that. So pre-season form, I almost tend to ignore it completely, especially the goals and the assists and stuff like that. It's more I'm looking at minutes and maybe tactics for new managers and stuff like that. But I'm very much going to go back to probably the tail end of last season, what was happening in that Arsenal attack. Martinelli was one of the main men, and I think he's quite unique, Martinelli, in what he offers to Arsenal on the left wing. I see Trossard as a slightly different player. I'm a big fan of Trossard, and I do expect him to probably cause headaches for us FPL managers by eating into the minutes of some of the other midfielders this season. And for that reason, I do have slight concerns about putting Martinelli back in, because even if he does start games, maybe it's a lot of 70-minute appearances more so than last season. So Arsenal's becoming tricky, especially with Havertz in the mix now as well. So Trossard not in my game week 1 thoughts, but he might just do enough to put me off going for Martinelli.
Yeah, that's kind of what my thinking had been as well. I'd had Martinelli points in the preseason because the prices were good, but I do think that I feel safer with some of the other options, which has probably just been confirmed by Trossard. Well, thank you very much, sir, for order number 2. We're now going to move on to the second of our mini segments, which is less about my family and more about yours. So I would like to introduce you to Sunny Soldiers.
Yeah, this is a nice idea I had. As many people know, I had a little boy in March, and we called him Sonny. So I had the idea of setting up an FPL team for him, and by the time he gets to 18 years old, he's going to have a history of 18 seasons under his belt with probably some atrocious ranks, and he can set up his own one when the time comes. But I've seen a few people, I put a tweet out for ideas on how I should pick a team for a 5-month-old. He'll be almost 6-month-old when the season starts. Obviously, has no idea about anything football yet, and may never have an interest, which will be absolutely fine as well. But for now, when he doesn't have a choice, he's going to have an FPL team. And I put out a tweet for ideas on how to pick a team for him. And one of them was, there's a lot of players in the league that have Son at the end of their name, or even in their first name, like a Mason. Jefferson, Emerson. There's a lot of Sons available. So the other suggestion was actually as well, Sonny's name is Sonny McGettigan, which has 15 letters, which is perfect for an FPL team. So it was maybe have one player in in each position with one letter from his name. But I like the Son idea more. So Heung-Min Son will be the auto captain every week. And I've got a pretty decent. There's actually a pretty decent squad of Sons. Now, I've seen this tweeted before in previous seasons. People have put up screenshots of teams that have Son at the end of every name, but this will be actively managed. It will be between myself and my wife. We'll look after the team. If someone gets injured, let's say James Maddison gets injured, he can only be replaced by someone with Son in their name. So there's a strong squad of 15 players available. And there's also, I think I've got 19 players on a watch list who also are eligible. Now, it was quite hard with just, the surname ending with Son, players like Robertson. So I had to make a few exceptions to include the first name as well. And I was quite proud of myself. I've got way too much time, and I spent a couple of hours one day going through the list of Premier League players to find first names that had Son as well. And I was very proud of finding Odsonne Edouard at Crystal Palace. So he's another option that is eligible. Hopefully he gets plenty of minutes this season. So just a fun little side project this season. And what I've done, I've set up a league, which is Dad versus Sonny. It's head-to-head as well. So we can check in from time to time. I'm sure there will be weeks where I get beaten by a 6-month-old who has a team of Sonnies, basically. And again, the big one for this, I need Harry Kane to leave Tottenham so that Richarlison gets more game time, because then you've got the beautiful midfield triple up of Son, Maddison and Richarlison, which should do pretty well if Harry Kane leaves. So very interesting to see. Again, overall rank-wise, I don't really care too much, but maybe, a top 1 million rank would be maybe a realistic target for this team. So we'll see how this goes. And I thought just on this video, it would be a good place to check in from time to time to see how the team's doing.
I have to say, it actually looks like quite a good team. I'm just going to list it off in full for the benefit of the podcast listeners. We've got Ederson and Alisson as a goalkeeper rotation, which is not bad. Robertson, Patterson, Robinson. Robinson from Fulham, of course. As you mentioned, that holy trinity of Sons over at Spurs, Richarlison, Son and Maddison. Son Mount at United. Harry Wilson at Fulham. And then Nicholas Jackson and Callum Wilson up front, which actually, that could be a really exciting front pairing, to be honest. You've got Ferguson as well on the bench, Emerson and Dawson. That's the 15. I mean, to be honest, in many ways, if you sort of covered up the fact that they had Son on the end of their name, this is actually like a really good differential 11 as well, because people always are trying to find one. I think this team could do pretty well this year.
Yeah, I was actually surprised. This might be the strongest season of putting a team together with Son at the end of it. I think Nicholas Jackson is a really good addition. Another one I'm watching closely who's not here is Brennan Johnson. He's another really good option. Whether he stays at Forest, or I know there was some talk about Brentford as well. I think the only issue is slightly weak defensively, possibly. The goalkeepers are fine, but I've got a watch list here as well of other defensive options. There's not much there. It's Emerson Royale, Nelson Semedo. You've got Ben Johnson at West Ham, Davinson Sanchez, Mason Holgate, and then you've got Robinson at Sheffield United as well. So I could really do with one or two new signings to the Premier League that are eligible for this team, in particular defenders. So it's good that there is options as well if there is injuries or suspensions that I will make transfers. But again, it'll be strictly to the rules. And again, the main thing is Heung-Min Son needs to come back with a bang and have a big season, because he will be perma captain.
Big responsibility for him, but he could be the king of the Sons, quite literally. So fingers crossed for that. Well, it's time now, I think, for us to move to our final order, with your permission, of course, sir.
Permission granted for order 3.
There we go. Order number 3 on the screen, which is your team. So talk us through the order related to this one.
Yeah, order number 3 for managers, for the rest of pre-season, at least once or twice, and at least when we get close to kick-off, get your team on your screen, on your laptop, on your computer, on your phone, whatever you're doing, your latest draft. Ignore the player names, ignore the player shirts, a very hard thing to do. You might even need to use something to cover them. Maybe your hand, if you're using your phone, it's quite easy to kind of scroll down and look at player prices only. So this is all about price points. Look at the player prices that make up your squad and ask yourself, is this a flexible team structure? For example, my team has Jesus, Plange, and Haaland. If I take away the names and the jerseys, it's 14, 8, and 4.5. And that's how I want to go into the season, because Haaland's the most expensive. Hopefully we'll be there all season. Jesus is a good price point for an Nkunku or a Watkins or a Jackson if I need to make a switch later. We should probably talk about plans as well, because I think we talked about him in the first video a couple of weeks ago. He's actually signed for Carlisle now. So I've got a big decision to make. Do I stick with him? He was in my Gameweek 1 team last season. Do I keep a red flagged 4.5 striker and buy myself a Carlisle jersey? It's funny, my dog's 3 years old, and she was actually born in Carlisle. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there's some kind of military advert about, born in Carlisle, raised in the Navy or something like that. So maybe plans needs to stay because he's gone to Carlisle where my little dog's from. But yeah, back to the price points. Do that for every position. Again, the goalkeepers, I've got a 5.0 and a 4.0. Maybe that will change to a 4.5 and a 4.0. But it's all about asking yourself, for example, what happens if X player does well? Can I get there? Again, a good example for this team structure would be questions like, what if I really need Trent? How do I get there? What if I really need Salah? How do I get there? And the answer is probably difficult, but if I can roll a transfer in game week 2, you can probably get to those players with 2 free transfers and maybe a -4, for 3 moves. So, we always preach flexibility. We preach, price points, but we do have free transfers to use over the first couple of game weeks. And it's never impossible to get to a player or 2 players with transfers, and never be afraid to take a hit if you need to restructure. So yeah, order number 3, look at the price points in your team, see if you're happy with it, see if you think it's flexible enough for maybe some of the targets on your watch list, and then you can go back to thinking about actual players and teams.
Yeah, well, so what I was going to do is actually just going to break your team down into the whole team for those price points. We'll start with the list of players, and then we're going to forget them. So Onana and Areola as the goalies, Stones, Gabriel, Estupinian, Tarkovsky and Bayer as the defenders, Foden, Saka, Rashford, Fernandes, Matoma as the midfielders, and as you said, Haaland, Jesus and Planche are the strikers, which means that your price points are in goal a 5 and a 4. In defence, it's a 5.5, a 5, a 5, a 4.5, and a 4. In midfield, it is, I'll try and do this in numerical descending order, a 9, 2 8.5s, 1 7.5, 1 6.5, and then, as you said up front, 14, 8, and 4.5. The midfield one looks particularly spicy, doesn't it? Do you feel that's the best place to have the most expensive, or the highest number of premium price points?
Yeah, I think thinking back to when the prices got revealed and the game launched, straight away, the first watch list I put together had a huge amount of midfielders and not as many forwards. I think I've only got 3 forwards on my watch list at the moment: Haaland, Jesus, and Watkins. So it's a very small pool of players. And that's why I favour 2 strikers to begin with and 5 midfielders, because I feel like midfield will be a place where we jump around a lot of options, maybe based on fixtures. There's just so many good picks, between 7 and 9. So yeah, that's where I want to spend most of my cash and have, 5 spots rather than 4, at least to start the season. And again, I think it's flexible enough that if a 3-4-3 emerges or we need to go 4 at the back, it's quite easy to do so. And I do plan to roll a transfer as often as possible. So, if I do need to restructure in terms of formation, it won't be too difficult to do so with these price points.
Well, I suppose the interesting thing is, in many ways, is that a 3-4-3 has started to sort of like have a bit of cut through in the community. I'm currently in 3-4-3, and I know a number of other people have experimented with one, quite liked it. It largely formulates around either having Haaland alongside 2 8 millions, or maybe a Jesus and a Nkunku, or a Jesus and a Jackson, for example, or in some cases Jesus and a Visser. A lot of that stems from getting rid of Alexander-Arnold, which of course you've done as well, but you've stayed in 3-5-2 with this draft, and in a way it's weird because I don't think I've looked at a 3-5-2 in what feels like weeks. And so it's interesting that as the 3-4-3 has started to gain popularity in terms of that pre-season meta, which is still finding its feet in many ways, there just has, I've seen already a shift to 3-4-3, at least amongst engaged managers, and you've not followed suit on that just yet. And I wondered if you had any thoughts there, because you seem open to moving to it if you feel the 3-4-3 is strong enough, but maybe you don't feel it is yet.
Yeah, personally, I have not made a single 3-4-3 draft. I'll probably make one before the season starts, but I'm very much dictated by my watch list, and the current watch list has about 30 players. And like I said, there's only 3 strikers there. So if I was to go for a 3-4-3, it would be Haaland, Jesus, and Watkins. And to me, that's just a little bit too much cash up front when I really want to focus on the midfielders. I think I would be more likely to move to a 4-4-2 than a 3-4-3 because Trent would probably come in instead of a Jesus or a Watkins and just go 4 at the back, 4-4-2. But again, I keep coming back to it. I love the midfielders. I've got loads of midfielders that are not in my current draft who I would like to have in my current draft, or at least early in the season. So I'm very determined to stick to my guns. And again, it goes back to the other order of going back to your draft number one. My draft number one was a 3-5-2. So my initial instinct, I want to try and stick to that. But again, it's flexible. If Nkunku emerges or Jackson, if Jesus is playing too well to sell him, very easily with 2 free transfers, I can, sell a Foden and a Plange and get an Nkunku if I need to, and a 4.5 million midfielder. So everything is flexible here, and certainly nothing set in stone. But I don't see myself going 3-4-3 game week 1. And again, come game week 4, if I think it's the best way to go, I'll happily go there. So the beauty of FPL is formation doesn't really matter. 3-5-2, 3-4-3, 4-4-2, even 4-5-1. There's no right or wrong answer here when we don't have any information. So don't be afraid to go with a formation that you feel is right, even if you're not seeing it too much on social media and stuff.
Yeah, I have to say, whenever I've had the questions about what's the best formation, I usually go, historically 3-4-3, but that's only because the price points have landed in such a way that you can make the best possible team and you happen to be in 3-4-3. Formation is very much a residual knock-on of what the best price points are, where the best players are, and we've just seen a natural shift in the way that football is played. We have slightly fewer, we have significantly fewer recognised number 9s across the league because most teams just play with one of those, whereas back in the day when we were first starting this, you'd have an Henry and you'd have a Drogba and you'd have a Rooney, all at those clubs alongside someone else playing a relatively similar role, and what we're seeing this year is just a natural residual knock-on effect of just how much football's changed over like 10, 15 years, etc., wouldn't you say?
Yeah, football's changed, and because of that, FPL has changed. And we had a spell, maybe 3, 4, 5 years where the wing backs were king. Your Chilwells, your Robertsons, your Trents and stuff. And that's kind of calmed down a wee bit now, and we seem to be shifting towards midfielders in FPL. And obviously, a lot of midfielders in FPL could arguably be forwards. Players like Salah and stuff like that who play, quite far advanced for their teams. But FPL keep them as midfielders in the game. So you're picking 5 midfielders, but a lot of the time you're picking 4 or 5 forwards really to go along with your 2 or 3 forwards that are actually FPL forwards. So it's shoehorning in as many forwards as you can, even across the midfield position. So don't get too hung up on, Salah's a midfielder in FPL, because he's a forward really, and you've got to just kind of shake that off. And yeah, don't get too hung up on formations. Basically, I tend to let the players and the fixtures and the good value picks dictate the formation. It's kind of players first, fixtures first, whatever formation that falls on, as long as it's in some way flexible, I think that's fine.
And it's also very nice for the troops to hear that this is a general who puts his players ahead of formations. It's all about the people involved in this rather than the principles, wouldn't you say, sir?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Sir General, for your contribution in the very first episode of General's Orders. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed having some instruction from a seasoned veteran. And of course, we'll be back every week, every Tuesday this season. You can catch the more orders from the training ground or whatever virtual environment you want to pretend we're in. And we will do our best to be as entertainingly dressed as you are happy with. If we get loads of hate mail about these outfits, we will lose them, we do promise. But if you enjoy them, then we'll keep them on. A couple of other things just to point people in the direction of course, the preseason guide. We've mentioned a couple of times the preseason matches and the minutes involved in that. If you haven't already had a chance to check out the preseason guide on Fantasy Football Scout, head to the website, have a look there. You'll notice that some of it you'll need to sign up to Fantasy Football Scout membership for, so make sure you sort that out before it's too late. Make sure you get that 30% off with the preseason prices. Of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel. Everything that you guys do in terms of liking videos and subscribing and hitting that bell notification all helps support the channel, helps us grow and do silly things like this. So yeah, thank you very much. I don't have anything else to add, sir, unless you'd like some parting words for the troops from the General.
Yeah, all I'll say is cheers, Brigadier David, for the first show. Looking forward to more of these this season, and happy tinkering to the troops who are watching and listening. And we'll be back next week. And be careful what you say, David, about we lose these outfits if people want us to. They might get the wrong idea and be very very excited for the next episode. So just to be clear, it'll be getting rid of the outfits and wearing something else. Not you won't be getting an OnlyFans version of myself and David.
And that right there is why I'm the Brigadier and you're the General, because you thought about not just the spirit, but the specificity as well. So I thank you very much, and I give you one final salute. And with that, we shall leave you fine folks to the rest of your tinkering, and we shall see you next time.